I stared at my phone, reading the message thread for the 10th time, my stomach turning with each scroll. The text between my husband Omar and his secretary Valerie painted a vivid picture I couldn't unsee. Can't wait to see you tonight, followed by heart emojis. Miss you already, with a kissing face. My anniversary dinner sat cold and untouched on our dining room table, candles burning down to stubs. I'm Faith, and after 12 years of marriage, I discovered my husband's affair on our anniversary, of all days. The irony wasn't lost on me. Honey, I'm so sorry, but this meeting is running late. Omar's voice message from 2 hours ago played in my head. Don't wait up. We'll celebrate tomorrow, I promise. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister Ellie. Did he make it home for your special dinner? I picked up my wine glass, took a long sip, and typed back, no, busy with work, again. 3 dots appeared immediately. That's the 3rd time this month. Want me to come over? Not tonight, I'm fine. I wasn't fine, but I needed time to think. The affair revelation hadn't come as a complete shock. The signs had been there. Late nights, mysterious phone calls, the sudden gym membership he never used. But seeing the actual messages made everything real. The worst part? I'd found them by accident while using his iPad to order his anniversary gift. My phone rang. It was Terrell, my colleague and closest friend at work. Happy anniversary, he sang into the phone. How's the celebration going? I swallowed hard. It's not. What? Where's Omar? Working late, with Valerie. My voice cracked on her name. Silence filled the line. Then, Faith, what's going on? I walked to the kitchen, dumping the perfectly cooked salmon into the trash. I found messages, lots of them. Turns out his late nights aren't exactly work-related. That son of a... Terrell stopped himself. Want me to kill him? I know people. Despite everything, I laughed. No murder necessary. Not yet anyway. What are you going to do? I looked at my reflection in the kitchen window, seeing not the devastated wife I expected, but something else. Determination. I'm not sure, but I'm not going to cry or scream or throw his clothes on the lawn. That's surprisingly calm of you. Maybe because I'm not done thinking this through. I opened my laptop, which still displayed the luxury watch I'd been about to order Omar. He thinks he's so clever, so in control, but he has no idea who he's dealing with. Faith? Terrell's voice held a warning. What's going on in that brilliant mind of yours? Remember that project management course we took? About how the best way to deal with a problem is to break it down into manageable pieces. You're not seriously... I need to go. Omar just pulled into the driveway. I hung up before Terrell could respond. I heard Omar's key in the lock, followed by his footsteps. I quickly closed the message thread on my phone and plastered on a smile. Baby, I'm so sorry, he said, loosening his tie as he walked in. That meeting with the investors went completely off track. He kissed my cheek, and I forced myself not to flinch. His cologne was different, sweeter, more feminine. It's fine, I said, standing up. I understand how important work is. He looked at the dining room table, guilt flashing across his face. You cooked. Faith, like I said, it's fine. I started clearing the table. There's always next year, right? Omar reached for my hand. Let me make it up to you this weekend. We'll go somewhere nice, just the 2 of us. I smiled, thinking of the hotel receipt I'd found in his email, already booked for that weekend. A reservation for 2 under V. Roberts. Sounds perfect. Later that night, as Omar slept soundly beside me, I opened my laptop and created a new document. At the top, I typed, Project Karma, Timeline and Objectives. My sister Ellie always said I was too forgiving, too willing to look the other way. But she didn't know this side of me, the methodical, strategic side I'd inherited from our father. The side that knew revenge was a dish best served not just cold, but with precise, calculated portions. I glanced at Omar's peaceful face and thought about Valerie, probably sleeping just as peacefully in her bed. They had no idea what was coming. Sometimes the best revenge isn't swift or dramatic. It's patient, deliberate, and absolutely devastating. I began to type, mapping out my plan. After all, I had always been good at project management. You're not planning to confront them? Ellie nearly spilled her coffee across my kitchen counter. It was Saturday morning, and Omar was at the gym, code for his weekend rendezvous with Valerie. Confrontation is predictable, I said, pulling up my project timeline on my laptop. I want something more effective. Ellie leaned over my shoulder, scanning the document. Faith, this is detailed, like scary detailed. I learned from the best. I smiled at my little sister, now a successful corporate lawyer. Remember how Dad always said the key to winning isn't throwing the first punch, but knowing exactly where and when to land it? Yeah, but this isn't a courtroom strategy. This is your marriage. Was my marriage. I clicked through to Omar's company directory. See Valerie here? Little Miss Executive Assistant with big dreams. She's been applying for a promotion to junior executive. And I happen to know, thanks to Terrell in HR, that she's the frontrunner. I pulled up another document. But what if some concerning discrepancies appeared in her performance reviews? Faith. Ellie's lawyer mode activated. That could be completely legal, I interrupted. I'm not creating fake documents. I'm just making sure certain existing issues don't get overlooked. My phone buzzed. A text from Omar. Great workout. Grabbing breakfast with some guys from the gym. Back in a few hours. I showed Ellie the message. Some guys from the gym, huh? Funny how Valerie posted a breakfast photo at Café Laurent 20 minutes ago. I pulled up Instagram, showing Valerie's perfectly arranged avocado toast. You're monitoring their social media? Knowledge is power, sis. I closed my laptop. Now, want to help me with phase 1? An hour later, we sat in my car outside Valerie's apartment building. This feels wrong, Ellie muttered. Wrong like sleeping with a married man? I checked my watch. Okay, her brother Frank should be leaving for his shift at the hospital now. Right on cue, Frank emerged from the building, medical bag in hand. I stepped out of the car, timing my walk perfectly to bump into him. Oh, I'm so sorry, I said, helping him pick up his dropped bag. Dr. Roberts, right? I'm Faith, a friend of Valerie's. Frank's expression shifted from annoyed to interested. You know my sister? Through work. She's been such a blessing to the company. I paused, letting concern cross my face. Though I've been worried about her lately, those late nights can't be healthy. Late nights? You know, with the new executive position she's up for, all those private meetings with the married executives. I trailed off deliberately. Frank's face darkened. What private meetings? Oh, I shouldn't have. Please don't mention this to her. I'm sure it's nothing. I hurried away, hiding my smile. Back in the car, Ellie shook her head. That was masterful and terrifying. Just wait. I pulled out my phone and opened my email. Now for part 2. I composed a quick email to Omar from an anonymous account. Your wife is more observant than you think. Careful where you leave your iPad. That's it? Ellie asked. For now, let him stew. I hit send. Next week, Valerie gets an anonymous tip about Omar's history with his previous secretary. Previous secretary? There wasn't one, but Omar doesn't know that Valerie doesn't know that. My phone buzzed again. Omar, coming home early. Miss you. Paranoia works fast, I commented, showing Ellie the text. Faith. Ellie grabbed my hand. Are you sure about this? You could just divorce him, take half, and be done. I thought about the 12 years I'd invested in this marriage, the dreams we'd built, the future we'd planned. This isn't just about revenge, Ellie. It's about justice. They think they're so clever, playing their little game, but they've never faced someone who knows how to play chess. And what's your end game? I started the car. To teach them both that actions have consequences. Omar loses his perfect image, Valerie loses her promotion dreams, and I smiled. I get to write the ending to this story. You're scary sometimes, you know that. I learned from watching you in court. I pulled into traffic. Now, want to help me plan the next phase? It involves Valerie's performance review next week. Do I have a choice? That's what I love about you, sis. You always know the right answer. As we drove home, I thought about Omar's face when he'd left this morning. The guilty kiss on my cheek. The lies that came so easily to him now. Soon, very soon, he'd learn that karma doesn't just happen. Sometimes it needs a little push in the right direction. And I was ready to push. Hard. The changes started small, but grew more noticeable each day. Omar began checking his phone less frequently, keeping it face down on tables. Valerie stopped posting her usual morning coffee selfies, but the real satisfaction came during my surprise lunch visit to Omar's office. Mrs. Martin! Valerie's voice cracked when I stepped off the elevator. Her perfectly manicured fingers fumbled with her keyboard. I didn't know you were coming. Just bringing lunch for my husband. I held up the bag from Omar's favorite deli. Is he in? He's on a call, but I'll wait. I sat in one of the reception chairs, watching Valerie squirm. Her phone buzzed and she jumped. The anonymous texts had been Terrell's idea. Unknown number keeps calling, hangs up after one ring, he'd explained. Classic paranoia inducer. Omar's office door opened. Valerie, did you finish the Henderson prop? He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me. Faith, what a surprise. I stood, kissing his cheek. Thought we could have lunch together, like we used to. His eyes darted to Valerie, then back to me. Of course, come in. Inside his office, Omar's nervous energy was palpable. He cleared files from his desk with shaking hands. Everything okay? I asked innocently. You seem tense. Just busy. The Henderson deal is... Omar? Valerie's voice came through the intercom. Frank's here to see you. The color drained from Omar's face. Frank? Valerie's brother? I raised an eyebrow. Why would he... The office door burst open. Frank stormed in, his hospital ID still hanging from his scrubs. We need to talk. Omar stood. This isn't a good time. I'm having lunch with my wife. Perfect. Frank's eyes locked onto me. She should hear this too. I sat back, watching the scene unfold. This was better than I'd imagined. My sister's been getting some interesting phone calls, Frank continued. Anonymous tips about your history with assistants. I don't know what you're talking about, Omar stammered. No? How about the late-night meetings? The private dinners? Frank stepped closer. The hotel receipts? I gasped dramatically. Hotel receipts? Omar's eyes widened. Faith, I can explain... Explain what? I stood, letting tears well up. What's he talking about, Omar? Nothing. It's all a misunderstanding. Omar turned to Frank. You need to leave. Now. Gladly. But if I hear one more thing about you and my sister... There is nothing going on with your sister. Valerie appeared in the doorway, face pale. Frank, what are you doing here? The look that passed between Omar and Valerie spoke volumes. I pretended not to notice. Just having a chat with your boss, Frank growled, about professional boundaries. This is inappropriate, Omar said. All of you, out of my office. I picked up my purse, letting my hand shake. I think I lost my appetite. Faith, wait. No. I held up my hand. I need some air, and you clearly have some explaining to do to Frank. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone and texted Terrell. Phase 3 complete, better than expected. Later that evening, Omar came home late, looking exhausted. About today. I don't want to talk about it. I focused on chopping vegetables for dinner. I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything. There is. Frank is just protective of his sister. He misunderstood some things. Like hotel receipts? Omar loosened his tie. Business meetings, Faith? You know how it is? Of course. I smiled sweetly. How's Valerie handling all this? What do you mean? Well, with her brother causing scenes at work, it can't look good for her promotion chances. Omar froze. How did you know about the promotion? Office gossip. I shrugged. Terrell mentioned it. Why? Is it a secret? No. Omar grabbed a beer from the fridge. Just complicated now. Everything seems complicated lately. I slid the vegetables into a pan. Remember when things were simple? When we first got married? Guilt flashed across his face. Faith, our anniversary's coming up soon, I continued. Maybe we could do something special, just us? Of course. He kissed my cheek, relief evident in his voice. Anything you want. That night, I updated my project timeline while Omar showered. Terrell had confirmed that Valerie's performance review was scheduled for tomorrow. The anonymous complaints about her unprofessional relationship with senior management had been filed. Her brother's outburst would be the final nail in her promotion coffin. My phone buzzed with a text from Ellie. You're actually scary good at this. I smiled, typing back, just wait, the best part's still coming. Because while Omar thought today's drama was the worst of it, he had no idea what I had planned for our anniversary. After all, every good story needs a memorable ending. She didn't get the promotion. Terrell slid into the booth across from me at our usual lunch spot, grinning. You should have seen her face when HR delivered the news. I stirred my coffee slowly. How did Omar take it? He couldn't say anything without raising suspicions, could he? But he looked like he was about to burst a blood vessel. My phone lit up with a text from Omar. "Working late tonight, don't wait up." I showed it to Terrell. "Damage control meeting, I bet." "You're not worried they'll—" "What? Run away together?" I laughed. "No, Omar's too concerned about his image. And Valerie—" I pulled out my tablet, showing Terrell the email I'd drafted. "She's about to have bigger problems." "What's this?" An anonymous tip to the board about some accounting irregularities in the executive expense reports. Nothing major, just enough to trigger an audit. "Faith," Terrell lowered his voice. "That could get Omar in trouble too." "Exactly." I took a sip of coffee. He's been sloppy with his expense reports lately. All those business dinners with Valerie. Let's see how they explain those to the auditors. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Ellie. "Frank just called me. He's furious about Valerie's promotion rejection." "Perfect timing," I muttered, then turned to Terrell. "Want to help me with Phase 4? 20 minutes later, we were in Terrell's office. As head of HR, he had access to all employee files. "Are you sure about this?" I nodded, watching him pull up Omar's expense reports. "Just forward them to the anonymous email address I gave you. The board will receive them tomorrow morning." "Someone's coming." Terrell minimized the screen as footsteps approached. Valerie appeared in the doorway, her eyes red. When she saw me, she stopped short. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know you had company." "Just catching up with an old friend," I said warmly. "I heard about the promotion. I'm so sorry." She flinched. "Thank you. I should go." "Actually," I stood up. "Can we talk? Woman to woman?" Terrell shot me a warning look, but I ignored him. Valerie hesitated, then nodded. We walked to the building's coffee shop, an uncomfortable silence between us. After ordering, I turned to her. "You know, I remember my first rejection for a promotion. It feels like the end of the world." I worked so hard," she whispered. "I'm sure you did. But sometimes—" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes our personal choices affect our professional lives." Her head snapped up. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing specific. Just that perception is everything in corporate life, especially for women." I stirred my coffee. "We have to be twice as careful about appearances." "Mrs. Martin, Please, call me Faith." I touched her arm gently. "And whatever you're about to say, don't worry. I'm sure everything will work out exactly as it should." Back at my office, I found 3 missed calls from Omar. I texted him. "In meetings all afternoon. Everything okay?" His response came quickly. "We need to talk tonight." "Can't. Girls' night with Ellie. Tomorrow?" "Fine." I smiled, imagining his frustration. The audit announcement would hit tomorrow morning, and he couldn't even warn Valerie. That evening, I met Ellie at her apartment. "You're playing with fire," she said, pouring wine. "What if this backfires?" "It won't." I showed her my phone. "Look at Valerie's latest Instagram post." The photo showed a half-empty wine glass with the caption, "Sometimes life forces you to make hard choices." "She's breaking," Ellie observed. "And Omar's about to crack too." I pulled up the email I'd sent to the board. By this time tomorrow, they'll both be under investigation. "Faith." Ellie sat beside me. "Are you sure this is what you want? It's not too late to just confront him, file for divorce." "And let them think they got away with it?" I shook my head. "No, they need to understand that actions have consequences." My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I know what you're doing." I showed it to Ellie, smiling. "Right on schedule." "What do you mean?" "Frank, I knew Valerie would confide in him eventually. He's protective, remember? But he can't prove anything." "You're terrifying," Ellie said, but she was smiling too. I learned from the best. I raised my glass. "To karma." "To karma," she echoed. "And to whatever you have planned next." I thought about the final phase of my plan, scheduled for our anniversary next week. Omar and Valerie thought they were clever, thought they could play their game without consequences. But they were about to learn that sometimes the biggest threat isn't the one you can see coming. It's the one that's been there all along, watching, waiting, and planning. The office was in chaos. The audit announcement had hit like a tornado, leaving destruction in its wake. I watched from my desk as Omar paced back and forth in his office, phone pressed to his ear. "The resignation letter is ready." Ellie said through my phone's speaker. Are you sure about the timing? Perfect timing, I replied, watching Valerie rush into Omar's office, clutching papers. The audit team arrives tomorrow. By then it'll be too late. A knock on my door made me jump. It was Layla, my boss and mentor of 5 years. Faith, got a minute? I ended the call with Ellie. Of course. Layla closed the door behind her. You know, it's interesting. All this drama with Omar's department, the audit, Valerie's failed promotion, and here you are, calm as ever. My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my face neutral. Should I not be? She sat down, studying me. I've known you for 5 years, Faith. You're one of the most strategic minds I've ever worked with. Nothing happens around you by accident. Are you accusing me of something? No. She smiled. I'm admiring your work, though I do wonder what the end game is. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from Omar. Where are you? We need to talk now. Trouble in paradise? Layla asked. Paradise was lost a while ago. I stood up. Excuse me, I need to handle this. I found Omar in his office, face pale. Valerie sat in a chair, tears streaming down her face. They both looked up when I entered. Faith, Omar rushed forward. I can explain. Explain what? I kept my voice innocent. The audit? I heard about that. Such bad timing, right after Valerie's promotion rejection. Mrs. Martin? Valerie started, but I cut her off. Please, I told you to call me Faith. I turned to Omar. What's going on? You seem stressed. The expense reports, he said. Someone's been going through them. The dinners, the hotels. Hotels? I let my voice crack. What hotels? The color drained from his face. Business meetings, all business. Really? I pulled out my phone, scrolling through photos. Like this business meeting at the Grand last month? The one where you said you were working late? They both froze. The photo showed them entering the hotel together, his hand on her lower back. How did you get this? I finished for him. Let's just say I'm not as naive as you thought. Valerie stood suddenly. I should go. Stay. My voice was steel. You'll want to hear this too. I pulled out an envelope. Your resignation letter, effective immediately. You can't, Omar started. Actually, I can. The board receives the full expense audit tomorrow, including every business dinner you two shared, every hotel receipt, every late-night meeting. I placed the letter on his desk. Sign it, Valerie, and this all stays quiet. Don't, and well, Frank might be the least of your worries. Valerie grabbed the letter with shaking hands. You planned this, all of it. Planned what? The audit? Your promotion rejection? The anonymous calls? I smiled. Prove it. Omar slumped in his chair. Faith, please, save it. I headed for the door. Oh, and Omar, don't forget our anniversary dinner next week. I've got something special planned. Back in my office, I found Layla waiting. Well, Phase 5 complete, I said, sitting down. Valerie resigns tomorrow morning. And Omar? He'll stew for a week, wondering what I have planned for our anniversary. Layla laughed. Remind me never to cross you. She stood to leave, then paused. You know, there's a VP position opening up next month. After this display of strategic thinking, I'd say you're a strong candidate. After she left, I texted Ellie. It's done. Valerie's resigning. How did Omar take it? Like a man watching his world crumble. I attached the photo I'd shown them. Amazing what a private investigator can catch on camera. You're actually scary, you know that? I learned from the best, sis. I looked out my office window, watching Omar's car leave the parking lot. He was probably heading to a bar, trying to figure out how everything had fallen apart so quickly. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from Valerie. I'm sorry, I never meant for any of this. I didn't respond. Her guilt wasn't my concern anymore. I had 1 week until our anniversary. 1 week to prepare the final act of this carefully orchestrated drama. Omar thought he knew what I was capable of. He thought this was the worst of it, but he had no idea what was coming. After all, the best revenge isn't just about destroying someone's present, it's about demolishing their future too. And I was just getting started. 3 days before our anniversary, Omar was a nervous wreck. He jumped every time his phone buzzed, watched me with wary eyes, and kept trying to gauge what I knew. I played my part perfectly, the oblivious wife planning a special anniversary dinner. I've made reservations at La Maison. I told him over breakfast. Remember our first date there? He nearly choked on his coffee. Faith, maybe we should talk about… About what? I looked up innocently from my tablet, where I was reviewing the final audit report Terrell had sent me. Nothing. He stood abruptly. I'll be late tonight. Board meeting. Of course. I smiled. Say hi to Valerie for me. Oh wait, she resigned, didn't she? How strange. The door slammed behind him. At work, Terrell caught me in the break room. The audit team found everything, he whispered. They're presenting to the board tomorrow. Perfect timing. Faith. Ellie's voice made us both jump. She stood in the doorway, face pale. We have a problem. She dragged me to my office, closing the door. Frank cornered me outside the courthouse. He knows. Knows what? That you orchestrated everything. The promotion rejection, the audit, Valerie's resignation. He's threatening to expose you. I laughed, pulling out my phone. Actually, this is perfect. I dialed Frank's number. He answered on the first ring. I was wondering when you'd call. Coffee? 20 minutes? Make it 10. I found him at the hospital cafe, still in his scrubs. He glared as I sat down. Before you start, I said, pulling out a folder, you might want to see these. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Omar and Valerie at various hotels, restaurants, intimate moments they thought were private. Your sister isn't the victim here, Frank. She knew he was married. She chose this. So this is revenge? Justice. I took a sip of coffee. You can expose me if you want, but ask yourself, who really gets hurt? Your sister's reputation is already damaged. This would destroy it completely. Frank stared at the photos. She's my little sister. And she made adult choices. Now she faces adult consequences. What do you want? Nothing. Just let this play out. I stood up. Unless you want these photos going public? Back at the office, Ellie was waiting. Well, Frank won't be a problem. I checked my watch. The board meeting starts in an hour. Want to watch the fireworks? We headed to the conference room floor, finding spots in the break room with a clear view. Through the glass walls, we could see Omar presenting, his forehead shiny with sweat. My phone buzzed. A text from Valerie. Please, I'll do anything. Too late, I typed back. Suddenly, the boardroom erupted in activity. Omar's face turned red as the audit team presented their findings. Through the glass, I could see him gesturing frantically. Mrs. Martin, a security guard approached. The board would like to see you. Inside the boardroom, all eyes turned to me. The head of the board, Margaret, spoke first. Mrs. Martin, were you aware of these expenses? Which expenses? I asked innocently. They showed me the reports. Hotels, dinners, gifts, all charged to the company account. Omar's face was ashen. Faith, please, he whispered. I'm shocked, I said, letting tears fill my eyes. All those late nights, the business meetings. Omar, how could you? Given the circumstances, Margaret said, we'll need your statement for the investigation. Of course. I wiped my eyes. Whatever you need. Later that evening, Omar didn't come home. Ellie brought wine and takeout instead. The board suspended him pending investigation, she said. His company phone and laptop are being confiscated tomorrow. Just in time for our anniversary. I raised my glass. One more day. What exactly do you have planned? I pulled out an envelope. Remember that prenup he insisted on? The one with the infidelity clause? Ellie's eyes widened. The one that says he loses everything if he cheats? Signed and witnessed by you, if I remember correctly. I smiled. Tomorrow night, he learns what it's like to lose everything you've built. You're not just taking his money, are you? Money? No. I pulled out another folder. I'm taking his reputation, his career, his dignity, everything he values. My phone lit up with a text from Omar. Can we talk, please? Tomorrow, I typed back. At dinner, our special anniversary dinner. Ellie shook her head. He has no idea what's coming, does he? That's the beauty of it. I tucked the folders away. He thinks tomorrow is about saving our marriage. He doesn't realize it's about destroying his entire life. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't just about winning. It's about making sure your opponent loses everything they ever cared about. And tomorrow night, Omar would lose it all. La Maison was exactly as I remembered from our first date. Soft lighting, intimate tables, the gentle clink of expensive silverware. I arrived early, arranging the folders neatly beside my place setting. Omar was late as usual, but this time I didn't mind. It gave me time to savor what was coming. He rushed in, still wearing his office clothes, looking harried. "Faith, I'm sorry." "Sit." I gestured to the chair across from me. "We have a lot to discuss." "Listen, about the audit, the board meeting." "Happy anniversary," I interrupted, sliding a small wrapped box across the table. He stared at it like it might explode. "Faith, open it." His hands shook as he unwrapped the box. Inside was a USB drive. "What's this?" "Everything." I took a sip of wine. "Every text message, every hotel receipt, every photo of you and Valerie. But that's not the best part." I opened the first folder. "This is." His face went pale as he read the documents. "These are my personal bank statements. How did you get them?" "The same way I got everything else. Carefully, methodically. While you were busy playing house with your secretary, I was busy too." "Faith, please, I can explain." "Can you explain this?" I pulled out another document. "The prenup you insisted on, the one with the infidelity clause?" The color drained from his face. "You knew? All this time?" "I knew everything." I leaned forward. "The audit? That was me. Valerie's promotion rejection? Me. The anonymous calls, the tips to her brother, all of it. Me. Why didn't you just confront me? And let you spin more lies?" I laughed. "No, you needed to learn something about consequences." The waiter approached, but I waved him away. "What do you want?" Omar's voice was barely a whisper. "Everything." I opened the last folder. "Sign these." He looked at the divorce papers, his hands shaking. "You'll destroy my career." "You did that yourself. The board already has copies of your expense reports. They're very interested in how company money funded your affair." "I'll fight this." "Really?" I pulled out my phone, showing him the screen. "Should I send these photos to the board? Your parents? Our friends? You've thought of everything, haven't you?" I learned from the best. I smiled. "You taught me how to be calculating, Omar. How to play the long game. I just got better at it than you." A commotion at the restaurant entrance drew our attention. Valerie stood there, mascara streaked down her face. "Perfect timing," I murmured. "Omar!" She rushed to our table. "They're saying we committed fraud. The board is—" "Valerie," I interrupted smoothly. "So glad you could join us. Would you like to see what your affair actually cost?" I spread the documents across the table. Bank statements, hotel receipts, photos, text messages. Her face crumpled as she read. "You set us up," she whispered. "No, you set yourselves up. I just made sure you faced the consequences." Omar reached for the divorce papers. "If I sign these, the photos stay private. The board gets a simplified version of events. You both get to keep a shred of dignity." "And if we don't?" I stood, gathering my things. "Then tomorrow, everyone sees everything. Your choice." "You're enjoying this," Valerie accused. "Actually, I'm not." I met her eyes. "I'm just finishing what you started." Omar picked up the pen, his hand trembling. "I never meant to hurt you." "Funny. That's exactly what Valerie texted me." I watched him sign. "The difference is, I don't care about intentions. I care about actions." I collected the signed papers, leaving them with their copies of the evidence. "Happy anniversary, Omar." I dropped my wedding ring on the table. The gift of consequences. Hope it was worth it. Outside, Ellie was waiting in her car. "How did it go?" "Exactly as planned." I slid into the passenger seat. Though Valerie's appearance was an unexpected bonus. "You really are terrifying." "No." I watched the restaurant disappear in the side mirror. "I'm just someone who finally stopped being afraid." My phone buzzed with a text from Terrell. "Board meeting tomorrow at 9. You ready?" "Ready," I typed back. "Time to close this chapter." "Where to?" Ellie asked. I thought about the empty house waiting for me, the life I'd need to rebuild. But for the first time in months, I felt light, free. "Anywhere," I said, "as long as it's forward." Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying someone else's life. It's about reclaiming your own. And I was finally ready to start living mine again. The morning sun streamed through my new office window as I unpacked the last box. A gentle knock made me look up. It was Layla. "The view suits you," she said, admiring the corner office. "VP of Strategic Operations. Has a nice ring to it." I placed my favorite photo on the desk. Me and Ellie at her law firm's charity gala last week. Still feels surreal. "You earned it." Layla sat down. "Though I have to ask, was all of this part of your plan too?" "The promotion?" I laughed. "No, that was just karma being particularly poetic." My phone buzzed. A news alert. The headline made me smile. "Major corporate scandal leads to executive resignation." Omar's finally gone public with his resignation. I showed Layla the article. Apparently he's taking a position at a smaller firm in Alaska. And Valerie? Last I heard, she's working at her brother's medical practice. Quite a step down from executive aspirations. Terrell burst into my office, waving his tablet. "Have you seen the comments on the company's internal message board? Everyone's talking about how you handled the audit presentation to the board." "I just stated the facts," I said, remembering how I'd laid out the evidence of financial misconduct without once mentioning the affair. Professional to the end. "You destroyed them without ever getting your hands dirty," Layla observed. "That's why you're sitting in this office now." My phone rang. "Ellie, turn on the local news, Channel 5. I grabbed the remote, switching on the office TV. Omar stood outside his lawyer's office, surrounded by reporters. "Mr. Martin, any comment on the allegations of corporate fraud?" "No comment," he muttered, looking old and defeated. "What about rumors that your ex-wife is now VP at your former company?" His head snapped up, eyes wide. I switched off the TV. "Still enjoying the consequences, I see." Terrell grinned. "Actually, I'm done watching." I stood up. "I have a lunch meeting with the new executive team. Time to focus on the future." "Speaking of future," Layla pulled out an envelope. "The board wanted me to give you this personally." Inside was a formal letter appointing me to the company's strategic planning committee. My hands shook slightly as I read it. "They were impressed by how you handled the audit," Layla explained. "Said anyone who could manage a crisis that professionally deserves a voice in the company's future." "Ironic," Terrell mused, "how trying to destroy your career led to advancing it instead." My phone buzzed again. A text from Frank. "Valerie's doing better. Thank you for keeping the photos private." "Some lessons don't need public humiliation to stick," I typed back. As my office cleared out, I took a moment to appreciate the quiet. The divorce was final, the drama was over, and somehow I'd emerged stronger than ever. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. It was Margaret from the board. "Got a minute?" she asked. "We're discussing the company's 5-year plan, and I'd love your input on strategic restructuring." "Of course." I grabbed my tablet, then paused at the door. "Actually, I have some ideas about preventing future financial misconduct." She smiled knowingly. "I bet you do." Walking to the conference room, we passed Omar's old office, now occupied by someone new, someone honest. The nameplate on my own door caught my eye. Faith Wise, VP Strategic Operations. I'd taken back my maiden name, but more importantly, I'd taken back my power. My phone lit up with a message from Ellie. "Dinner tonight? We're celebrating." "Absolutely," I replied, "but not because of karma or revenge." "Then what are we celebrating?" I looked around at my new office, thought about my new role, my new life. "We're celebrating moving forward," I typed. The best revenge wasn't destroying Omar's life. It was building mine into something better than he could ever imagine. Because in the end, the greatest victory wasn't in watching him fall. It was in rising so high that his fall became irrelevant. And as I walked into that board meeting, head held high, I knew I'd won something far more valuable than revenge. I'd won my future. And this time I was writing my own story, one where I wasn't the victim or even the vengeful victor. I was simply myself, strong, capable, free. And that was the best ending I could have written.
I was born into what you might call unusual circumstances. My parents, Sarah and Michael Thompson, were well into their 40s when I came into this world, a miracle they never expected. They already had my brother James, who they'd adopted when he was 3 years old, about 6 years before I was born. Mom used to tell me the story of how they found James at the local orphanage. After years of failed attempts to conceive, they had decided to open their hearts to a child who needed a home. The moment they saw James, with his mop of brown curls and shy smile, they knew he was meant to be their son. They gave him everything they could: love, attention, the best education they could afford. He was their whole world. Then I happened. The doctors couldn't believe it, Mom would say, her eyes tearing up every time she told the story. They kept running tests, because they thought there must be some mistake. But there you were, growing strong and healthy inside me. I came into the world on a rainy April morning, a healthy 7-pound baby girl they named Chelsea. Dad said he'd never seen Mom cry so much as she did when she first held me. They were overjoyed to have a daughter, especially one they'd thought impossible. But James was a different story. I remember one of my earliest memories, probably when I was around 3. I was toddling after James in our backyard, my chubby legs struggling to keep up with his longer strides. "Jamie, wait for me," I called out, using the nickname he hated. He whirled around, his face twisted with anger. "Stop following me. And don't call me Jamie." "But I want to play with you," I said, my lower lip trembling. "Well, I don't want to play with you. Why don't you go bother Mom and Dad? They love having their precious little miracle around." I didn't understand then why he was so angry. In my innocent mind, he was my big brother, and I loved him unconditionally. I thought that's just how it worked: you love your family, and they love you back. Mom and Dad tried their best to manage the situation. They made sure to give James just as much attention as they gave me, if not more. When they bought me new clothes, they bought him something too. When they took me to the park, they made sure to schedule something special for James as well. "James, honey," I once overheard Mom saying through his bedroom door, "Chelsea's your sister. She loves you so much. Can't you try to?" "She's not my sister," James had shouted back. "She's just the kid you had when you decided I wasn't enough." When I was 4, things at home went from bad to worse. I remember sitting at the bottom of our stairs one evening, clutching my stuffed rabbit, while another one of James's explosions shook our house. "I'm not going to some shrink," James's voice boomed through the hallway. "You think I'm crazy now? Is that it?" "Nobody thinks you're crazy, sweetheart," Mom's voice was gentle, but strained. "We just want to help you work through your feelings. Dr. Anderson is really nice, she—" "Oh sure," James cut her off. "Ship the adopted kid off to therapy while your real daughter gets to stay home. That's what this is really about, isn't it?" I heard Dad's heavy sigh. "Son, this has nothing to do with Chelsea. We're worried about you. You've been so angry lately." "Of course I'm angry." Something crashed against the wall, probably one of the framed photos Mom loved so much. "You got your perfect little biological child now, so why do you even need me around? Why don't you just send me back?" "James, please," Mom was crying now. "We love you just as much as we love Chelsea. You're our son." "Liar. I'm not your son, I'm just some kid you picked up when you couldn't have your own." I heard footsteps thundering up the stairs and pressed myself against the wall. James stormed past me like I wasn't even there, his face red with rage. His bedroom door slammed so hard the whole house seemed to shake. That became our new normal. Every little thing set James off. When Mom bought me new shoes for kindergarten, she made sure to get him an expensive new backpack for middle school. But he threw it across the room, claiming she'd spent more on my shoes. Even when they tried to include me in his life, it backfired. They took me to his basketball games, thinking it would help us bond as siblings. Instead, he'd get furious if I cheered for him. "Stop bringing her," he yelled after one game. "She's ruining everything. Everyone's looking at her instead of watching me play." I remember one particularly bad day when Mom got us both ice cream cones. Mine had sprinkles on it, and James's didn't, not because Mom hadn't offered, but because he'd said he didn't want any. 5 minutes later, he was having a meltdown about how they always gave me extra special treatment. These episodes would end the same way. James would lock himself in his room, sometimes for days. Mom would leave trays of food outside his door, which he'd only retrieve late at night when he thought we were all asleep. I'd hear him sometimes, padding down the hallway like a ghost. During these silent periods, our house felt like it was holding its breath. Mom would cry when she thought I couldn't see her. Dad would stand outside James's door for long minutes, his hand raised to knock, before walking away without making a sound. And I, not fully understanding what was happening but knowing somehow that I was part of the problem, tried to make myself as small and quiet as possible. I was 6 years old when Aunt Martha died. I didn't know her well. She was Mom's aunt who lived several hours away, but her death threw our family into chaos in a way none of us expected. "We have to leave right now," Mom said, hurriedly packing an overnight bag. "James, you're old enough to watch Chelsea for one day. We'll be back late tonight." James rolled his eyes, but nodded. "Whatever." "There's food in the fridge," Dad added, checking his wallet. "And both our cell numbers are on the kitchen board. Call if anything happens." I know, James muttered. "I'm 15, not stupid." I watched from the window as their car pulled away. James waited exactly 3 minutes after they left, before grabbing his jacket. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice small. "Out. Don't touch my stuff." He was already heading for the door. But Mom and Dad said. "Mom and Dad say a lot of things," he sneered. "Just watch TV or whatever. And don't tell them I left or you'll be sorry." The door slammed behind him, and suddenly I was alone in our big house. At first, I tried to be brave. I watched cartoons, ate the sandwich Mom had left in the fridge, and played with my dolls. But as the hours ticked by and the sun started to set, fear crept in. The shadows grew longer. Every creak of the house made me jump. I tried calling James's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. By the time darkness fell completely, I was terrified. I huddled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, crying quietly and watching the front door. It was almost midnight when I heard our parents' car in the driveway. I ran to the door, tears streaming down my face. "Chelsea," Mom scooped me up. "What's wrong? Where's James?" He left," I sobbed. "Right after you did." I was so scared. Dad's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. "He left you alone? All day?" James didn't come home until the next morning, swaggering in like nothing had happened. He found Mom and Dad waiting in the kitchen, their faces grim. "Where were you?" Dad's voice was deadly quiet. James shrugged. "With friends. We trusted you," Mom's voice cracked. "Your sister could have been hurt." "Oh, here we go again." James threw up his hands. "Everything's about precious Chelsea. She's fine, isn't she? Stop treating me like a criminal." The punishment came swift, grounded for a month, no phone, no friends. But James had one more card to play. 2 days later, a woman from Child Protective Services showed up at our door. James had filed a complaint, claiming our parents were abusive and favored me over him. I remember sitting in my room, listening to the woman interviewing Mom and Dad in the living room. The investigation didn't find any evidence of mistreatment, how could it? But the damage was done. Mom cried for days, and Dad walked around like a ghost, the betrayal written deep in the lines of his face. Everything changed the summer James turned 16. I remember the exact moment. He burst into the kitchen during dinner, his phone clutched in his trembling hand. "They found me," he announced, his voice cracking. "My real parents." Mom's fork clattered against her plate. Dad reached for her hand under the table. "They sent me a message," James continued, practically vibrating with excitement. "They said they made a mistake giving me up. They want to meet me." "Are you sure that's what you want?" Dad asked carefully. "Of course it is. They're my actual parents." I watched Mom flinch at the word actual, but she forced a smile. If that's what you want, we'll support you." The first meeting was arranged at a local restaurant. James came home practically floating. "They're loaded," he announced. Like, seriously rich. They own 3 companies. That was just the beginning. Suddenly, James was sporting the latest iPhone. A week later, a brand new gaming console appeared in his room. Then came the car, a shiny red Mercedes that he parked ostentatiously in our driveway. "Must be nice having parents who can afford decent gifts," he sneered at Mom one morning when she commented on his new designer shoes. "James," Dad warned, but James cut him off. "What? It's true. Look at this place," he gestured around our comfortable but modest home. "It's practically a slum compared to their house. Did you know they have a pool? And a home theater?" The comments got crueler, more deliberate. He started calling our parents the old folks or the poverty patrol. Every conversation became an opportunity to compare our life unfavorably to his biological parents' wealth. "God, can't you even afford real orange juice?" he'd complain at breakfast. "My real mom gets everything organic." Then came that final night. James didn't come home for dinner. Mom kept calling his phone while Dad paced the living room. They were still up at 3 a.m. when he finally strolled in. "Where have you been?" Mom jumped up. "We were worried sick." James's face twisted into a smirk. "At my parents' house." "My real parents." "We are your real," Dad started. "No, you're not," James cut him off coldly. "And I'm done pretending. I'm moving in with them." Mom stumbled back like she'd been slapped. "What? You heard me. They can give me a real life, not this pathetic excuse for one. I'm sick of living in this dump. Sick of pretending to care about your precious little miracle child." He glanced at me with disgust. "I don't need hand-me-down parents or a fake sister anymore." The next few weeks were a blur of court appearances and social workers. James's biological parents had money and good lawyers. They argued that James was old enough to choose where he wanted to live. The judge agreed. On moving day, James packed his things efficiently, like he couldn't wait to leave. Mom tried to hug him goodbye. He stepped around her like she was furniture. Dad stood in the doorway, looking old and defeated. "James," he said softly. "You'll always have a home here." But James was already walking to his Mercedes, not looking back. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't even close the front door behind him. Life went on after James left, but there was always something missing in our house, like a phantom limb that still ached even though it wasn't there anymore. Mom would set 4 places at the table sometimes, then quietly remove the extra plate when she caught herself. Dad would pause while telling stories, carefully editing out the parts that involved James. Every holiday, without fail, they'd try to reach out. I'd watch Mom carefully selecting Christmas cards, spending hours writing personal messages inside. "Maybe this year," she'd whisper, sealing each envelope with trembling fingers. The cards would disappear into the void of silence James had created around himself. Birthday cards met the same fate. So did the graduation card they sent to his last known address, and the letter Mom wrote when Dad had his minor heart surgery. One night, during my junior year of high school, I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water when I heard Mom crying in their bedroom. "He's blocked us, Michael," she sobbed. I tried calling from Mary's phone, but that number's disconnected too. I can't even see his Facebook page anymore. I just want to know if he's okay. Just to know he's alive. And my friend's older sister let me use her Facebook account the next day. James's profile wasn't hard to find, he'd become quite the social media star in his wealthy new life. His latest post made my stomach turn. Finally cleaned out the last of my old contacts. No more deadweight from the past. Don't need any reminders of those poor old folks who kept me around until they had their own kid. Time to live my real life with my real family. Best decision ever, living my best life. The photos showed him on tropical vacations, posing next to expensive cars, partying in exclusive clubs. In every shot, he was smiling wider than he ever had in our family photos. I never told Mom and Dad about the post. They were carrying enough pain already. The years slipped by. I graduated high school with honors. Mom and Dad made up for James's absence by cheering loud enough for 3 people. I got accepted to college, packed up my room, and prepared to start my own life. Dad had recovered well from his heart surgery, though he'd finally retired from the accounting firm. They were settling into a quieter life, volunteering at the local library, taking evening walks, doting on the neighbors' grandkids. Sometimes I wondered about James. Not often, I'd trained myself not to. But occasionally, I'd catch myself wondering if he ever regretted his choice, if he ever missed the people who'd loved him before he had access to credit cards and luxury cars. 10 years had passed since he'd walked out our front door. I understood more than I had as a child, about adoption, about trauma, about the complicated tangles of family and belonging. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less. Understanding didn't erase the way Mom still glanced at the phone sometimes, hoping it would ring. Understanding didn't fill the silence in our family albums where James's teenage years should have been. That terrible call came during my economics lecture. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Is this Chelsea Thompson? Yes. This is Officer Martinez from the County Police Department. I'm very sorry to inform you. The rest became a blur of words I didn't want to hear. Car accident. Instant. No pain. Need you to identify. I don't remember leaving the lecture hall. I don't remember driving to the hospital. I just remember standing in that cold, fluorescent-lit room, looking at the 2 sheets, and thinking, they can't be under there. They're supposed to pick me up for dinner this weekend. The next few days passed in a fog of paperwork and phone calls. I took a leave from college. There were so many decisions to make, so many details to handle. The funeral home wanted to know about flowers. The cemetery needed plots chosen. People kept bringing casseroles I couldn't eat. The day of the funeral dawned bright and clear, the kind of autumn morning Mom loved best. The church filled with familiar faces, neighbors, Dad's colleagues, Mom's library friends. I sat alone in the front pew, staring at the 2 caskets covered in white lilies. Then I heard the murmurs. I turned and saw him striding down the aisle, James. For a moment, my heart lifted. He'd come. After all these years, he'd come to say goodbye. But he wasn't alone. A man in an expensive suit followed close behind him, carrying a leather briefcase. "Hello, Chelsea," James said, his voice carrying none of the grief appropriate for the occasion. "Sorry about the old folks." I stared at him, unable to process his casual tone. You came." "Well, yeah." He gestured to the man beside him. "This is Mr. Patterson, my lawyer." "Well, technically my parents' lawyer, my real parents, I mean." They thought I should have proper representation for the inheritance discussion. The word hit me like a physical blow. Inheritance? Obviously, he straightened his designer tie. I may have moved on, but legally, I was their son for 13 years. That entitles me to a share. "They're not even in the ground yet," I whispered, horrified. He shrugged. "Just being efficient. I've got a new business venture that could really use some capital. This inheritance could help with that." The service began. James sat a few pews behind me, and throughout the eulogies, the prayers, the final hymns, I could hear the soft tapping of his phone. When I glanced back once, he was smiling at his screen, completely disconnected from the fact that the people who had raised him, who had loved him unconditionally, were lying in caskets mere feet away. Mom and Dad had taught me that love was patient, love was kind. But watching James tap away on his phone during their funeral, occasionally smirking at whatever message he was sending, I learned that love could also break your heart. The house felt empty when we returned after the funeral. Mr. Collins, the family notary who'd known us for years, sat up at the dining room table, the same table where we'd eaten countless family dinners, where Mom had helped with my homework, where Dad had done the crossword every Sunday morning. James sprawled in Mom's favorite chair, his lawyer Mr. Patterson sitting properly beside him. I chose Dad's old spot, my fingers tracing the worn edge of the table. "Shall we begin?" Mr. Collins adjusted his glasses. His voice was gentle, probably noting my red-rimmed eyes. He pulled out the document, Mom and Dad's last will and testament, dated just 2 months before the accident. As he read, I could almost hear their voices in the formal legal language. "Hereby bequeath our entire estate, including our residential property at 1247 Maple Street and all financial assets, currently valued at approximately $200,000, to our daughter, Chelsea Marie Thompson." "What?" James shot forward in his chair. "That's it? What about me?" Mr. Collins looked up. "The will is quite clear. Miss Thompson is the sole heir." "This is bullshit." James turned to his lawyer. "They can't do this. I was their son." Mr. Patterson reviewed the document carefully, his frown deepening. "The will appears to be properly executed. Given that you legally terminated your relationship with the Thompsons when you chose to return to your biological parents' custody, I'm afraid we don't have grounds to contest." James's face turned purple. Though senile, worthless, he launched into a stream of obscenities about Mom and Dad that made me feel physically ill. Even Mr. Patterson looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and avoiding eye contact with his client. Mr. Thompson, Mr. Collins, cleared his throat, interrupting James's tirade. "There is one more thing. Your parents left a letter for Chelsea." He pulled out an envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges. I couldn't bear to read it myself, seeing their handwriting would break me all over again. "Would you?" My voice cracked. "Would you read it for me?" Mr. Collins nodded, breaking the seal. "Dearest Chelsea, if you're reading this, we're no longer with you, and for that, we're so sorry. We know you're strong, you've always been our rock, especially after James left. But you're also kind, perhaps the kindest person we've ever known. Everything we have is yours now. The house where we made so many memories, the savings we put aside for your future, it's all in your hands. We trust your judgment completely. But we have one last hope. If James ever finds his way back to us, if he comes to say goodbye and shows that somewhere inside him is still the boy we loved so much, we ask you to consider sharing this inheritance with him. This is entirely your choice, we would never presume to tell you what to do. You'll know in your heart if he deserves this chance. We love you, sweetheart. We love both of you, always have, always will. Mom and Dad." I watched as the color drained from James's face. For the first time since he'd walked into the funeral, his carefully constructed facade cracked. "Chelsea," his voice suddenly turned soft, pleading. "I didn't mean what I said before. About Mom and Dad. I was just upset, you know how it is. The shock of losing them." I stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time not the brother I'd once adored, but the stranger he'd become. "They were such good people," he continued, his voice thick with fake emotion. "And you're right, they did raise me. Maybe we could honor their memory by investing in my new business venture? I'm sure they would have wanted." "Stop," my voice was quiet but firm. "Just stop." He blinked, thrown off script. "Mr. Collins," I turned to the notary, "the letter says this decision is voluntary, correct?" "Absolutely," he nodded. "The choice is entirely yours, Miss Thompson." I stood up, my legs steady, despite the emotional earthquake of the day. "Then my answer is no. You showed exactly who you are today, James. You couldn't even put down your phone during their funeral. You called them worthless before their bodies were cold. But they loved you until their last breath," I continued, my voice breaking slightly. "They still hoped you'd find your way back to being the person they raised you to be. But that person is gone, isn't he? If he ever existed at all." I walked to the front door and opened it. "Please leave. Don't come back. Don't try to contact me." James's face darkened. "You self-righteous little..." "Mr. Thompson," his lawyer cut in sharply, gripping his arm. "I advise against any further comments. They could be considered harassment, which would have legal consequences." James yanked his arm free, but the threat of legal trouble finally silenced him. He stormed out, his expensive shoes clicking on our worn porch steps one last time. The door slammed so hard that Mom's favorite wind chimes tinkled in protest. That was 3 years ago. I finished college with honors, the degree Mom and Dad had always dreamed of seeing me earn. I kept their house, but rent it out now. Too many memories make it hard to live there yet. The inheritance money is carefully invested, just like Dad would have wanted. Sometimes people ask if I regret my decision. I don't. Mom and Dad's last letter wasn't really about money, it was about choice. They chose to love James, even after he rejected them. They chose to hope, even when hope seemed foolish. And in the end, they chose to trust me to make the right decision. I don't know what happened to James. I don't check his social media anymore. I don't ask about him when I occasionally run into his biological parents at the grocery store. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. But I keep Mom and Dad's letter, tucked away in my desk. Not because I doubt my choice, but because it reminds me of what they taught me about love, that it's patient and kind, yes, but also that real love requires truth. And sometimes, the truest form of love is knowing when to let go. My name is Claire, and my early years were simple and happy, at least that's what I remember. My parents both worked at the local factory, a steady job that kept food on our table and a roof over our heads. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. I was only 6 when the factory declared bankruptcy, leaving both my parents jobless in one devastating blow. I remember the night they sat me down in our small living room. Mom's eyes were red from crying, though she tried to hide it with a forced smile. Dad kept fidgeting with his wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd come to recognize. "Claire, sweetie," Mom began, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to tell you something important. Your father's old friend has offered us a business opportunity in another state," Dad continued, trying to sound optimistic. "It's a fresh start for all of us." I didn't fully understand what was happening until they explained that I would be staying with Grandma while they got everything sorted out. They promised it would be temporary, just until they could establish themselves in the new place. The next day, I found myself in Grandma's cozy house, surrounded by the smell of fresh-baked cookies and the gentle whirring of her old ceiling fan. She did her best to make the transition easier, but nothing could fill the void left by my parents' absence. They called regularly, at first, every few days, then weekly, then whenever they had time. Each call followed the same pattern. They'd tell me about their growing business, promise to visit soon, and assure me they were working hard to create a better future for all of us. Life with Grandma settled into a comfortable routine. She was patient, kind, and always made sure I felt loved. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being left behind, especially during school events when other kids' parents would show up with cameras and proud smiles. Then, for years later, everything changed again. I was 10 when they showed up unannounced on Grandma's doorstep, not to take me home as I'd hoped, but to add another child to Grandma's care. My 2-year-old sister, Sarah, clung to Mom's leg as they explained that their business demanded too much time for proper parenting. "We're doing this for their future," I overheard Dad telling Grandma in the kitchen that night. "We'll send more than enough money for both girls. You can hire help, whatever you need." Grandma's response was firm but tired. "If you're going to do this, we need to make it official. No more informal arrangements." That's how, in one afternoon, my parents legally transferred their parental rights to Grandma. They signed the papers with practiced efficiency, as if they were closing another business deal. The first nanny Grandma hired was Mrs. Peterson, a sweet lady in her 50s, with decades of childcare experience. She lasted exactly 2 days. Sarah would scream the moment I left for school, her tiny face turning red as she reached desperately for me. "I'm so sorry," Mrs. Peterson said, gathering her things after another failed attempt. "In all my years, I've never seen such separation anxiety." Grandma tried 5 more nannies over the next few months. Each one came highly recommended, each one left defeated. Sarah would throw herself on the floor, kick and scream, or hide under furniture, anything to avoid being left with a stranger. "No. Want Claire? Claire," became her daily mantra. I remember one particular morning when Ms. Rodriguez, our third nanny, tried to read Sarah a story. My sister took one look at the book, threw it across the room, and ran to me, wrapping her little arms around my legs. "Claire, stay," she demanded, tears streaming down her face. That's when I started taking more responsibility. I was only 10, but I learned to change diapers, prepare simple meals, and handle Sarah's bedtime routine. At first, money wasn't an issue. Mom and Dad sent generous monthly payments, more than enough for Grandma to keep trying with different nannies and still have plenty left over for our needs. We had new clothes, good food, and even some extras. Sarah's room was filled with educational toys, and I got a new bicycle for my 11th birthday. But then the payments started becoming irregular. Sometimes they'd send less than promised, other times nothing at all. Their excuses varied: business was slow, investments needed time, the market was down. Grandma started cutting corners. No more new clothes unless we absolutely needed them. Generic brands instead of name brand cereals. Careful budgeting of utilities. She tried to hide her worry, but I'd catch her at the kitchen table late at night, calculator in hand, trying to make the numbers work. By the time I was finishing high school, the situation had become dire. The promised college fund? Non-existent. My parents had completely dropped off the radar, no calls, no money, no explanation. My final report card came with a full scholarship offer to State University, but even with that, we couldn't afford the remaining costs. "The trading company downtown is hiring," I said firmly. "They offer health insurance and steady pay. We need that more than I need college right now." The next week, I started my job as a junior sales associate at Marshall Trading Company. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to keep food on the table and Sarah in school clothes. College would have to wait. Grandma's death hit us like a thunderbolt on a clear day. One morning, she just didn't wake up. Sarah was 16, and I was 24. We stood together at the funeral, just the two of us, watching as they lowered the casket into the ground. Our parents didn't show up, didn't even send flowers or a card. Life got harder after that. I picked up every extra shift I could at Marshall Trading. Weekends? I worked them. Holiday pay? I volunteered first. Office party planning committee? Sign me up, it came with a small stipend. Every extra dollar went into what I called Sarah's future fund. My coworker Jenny would constantly try to drag me out to bars or set me up on dates. "Claire, you're wasting your youth," she'd say, perched on the edge of my desk during lunch breaks. "That cute guy from accounting asked about you again." "No time for dating," I'd reply, not even looking up from my spreadsheets. Sarah's college applications are due next month. Those years were a blur of work, home, bills, and making sure Sarah had everything she needed for school. I bought my clothes from thrift stores, but made sure Sarah had new ones. I ate ramen noodles, but packed her healthy lunches. Every bonus went straight into her college fund. When Sarah got accepted to Riverside University, I nearly cried from relief. We could just barely afford it with her partial scholarship and my savings. Life has a funny way of surprising you sometimes. Right after Sarah left for college, Marshall Trading got bought out. The new CEO, Michael, started making regular visits to our office. He was different from what I expected, kind, down-to-earth, and genuinely interested in his employees' well-being. I caught him looking at me during meetings, and he'd often stop by my desk to ask my opinion on various projects. One day, he just straight up asked me to dinner. "I know it's not professional," he said, looking slightly nervous, "but I'd really like to get to know you better, Claire. Outside of work." For the first time in years, I said yes to a date. Our courtship was simple, but sweet. Michael understood my dedication to Sarah and admired it. He didn't try to rush things or pressure me. A year later, we got married at the courthouse, with just a few close friends as witnesses. We decided to live in Grandma's house. I couldn't bear to part with it, and Michael said it had good bones. Suddenly, life got easier. Michael's salary meant I could finally buy myself nice things without feeling guilty. I got my first designer handbag, started getting regular haircuts at a proper salon instead of trimming it myself in the bathroom. Last month, Michael surprised me with a trip to the Maldives. As I lounged on the beach, posting photos of the crystal clear water and white sand beaches to Instagram, I couldn't help but marvel at how much my life had changed. For the first time in forever, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. The message appeared in my Instagram inbox 3 days after I posted those beach photos. My hands started shaking when I saw the name, Mom. The profile picture showed her and Dad, both tanned and well-dressed, standing in front of some European landmark. Darling Claire, the message read. We've just returned from an extended business trip abroad. We've been thinking about you and Sarah constantly. We'd love to reconnect with both our daughters. Your father and I have changed. Please give us a chance to explain everything. I showed the message to Michael, who just held my hand as I stared at the screen. The nerve of these people, I muttered. An extended business trip? They've been gone for 15 years. My response was short, I don't want any contact with you. Please don't message me or Sarah again. We stopped being your daughters when you signed away your rights. Then I hit the block button. My hands were still trembling when I called Sarah. She picked up on the 4th ring, sounding distracted. Mom and Dad reached out to me, I said without preamble. There was a pause on the other end. Too long of a pause. Oh? Sarah's voice was carefully neutral. What did they say? I told her about the message and my response. The silence stretched between us again. Maybe, Sarah started hesitantly, maybe we should hear them out? Just out of curiosity? People can change, Claire. Are you serious? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They abandoned us. They didn't even come to Grandma's funeral. I know, she backpedaled quickly. You're right. Of course, you're right. I won't talk to them either. But something in her voice didn't sit right with me. It was too rehearsed, too uncertain. After that conversation, things changed between us. Sarah's calls became shorter, less frequent. She always had an excuse for why she couldn't visit during breaks, too much studying, a summer internship, plans with friends. I can come visit you, I offered countless times. Oh, this weekend's not good, she'd say. I have a huge project due. Maybe next month? But next month never came. Eventually, the call stopped altogether. I tried reaching out, but she'd only respond with brief texts, super busy, caught up with finals, talk soon. I found myself checking her Instagram daily. Her profile was sparse, just a few generic photos of coffee cups and library books, an occasional selfie. No location tags, no friend tags, nothing that gave away anything about her actual life. Sarah's graduation came and went without an invitation. I only found out about it through a generic post on her Instagram, finally done. No photos, no details, nothing. I spent that entire day staring at my phone, hoping she might at least send me a picture or call to share her excitement. But there was only silence. A month later, she was back in town. She didn't come to visit. Instead, I got a text, "Hey, just letting you know I'm back. Got an apartment on the east side. Starting my new job next week." That's great, I replied, my heart racing with hope for reconnection. Want to grab coffee? Catch up? I've really missed you. Super busy with the move. Maybe later. Later never came. Weeks turned into months, and Sarah remained as elusive as ever. I'd find myself idling at traffic lights, staring at young women walking down the street, hoping to catch a glimpse of my sister. Then came the morning that changed everything. Michael was scrolling through his Facebook feed during breakfast, coffee in hand, when he suddenly went very still. I noticed the change in his expression immediately, the way his jaw tightened, how his eyes narrowed slightly. "Claire," he said carefully, his voice measured in a way that made my stomach twist. "I need to show you something." He handed me his phone. On the screen was a wedding invitation from his college friend, James Anderson. Below it was a photo that made my coffee cup slip from my fingers and shatter on the floor, sending hot liquid and ceramic shards across our kitchen tiles. There was Sarah, in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary, diamond earrings sparkling, her arm wrapped around James. Her smile was radiant, confident, a smile I hadn't seen in years. The caption read, "She said yes. Wedding in 3 weeks." "I don't understand," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. She never even told me she was dating anyone." We immediately went to Sarah's Instagram page, the one I'd been following religiously for years. Nothing. Not a hint of engagement or James or anything. Just the same sparse feed of coffee cups and vague quotes about success. But on James's profile, there she was again. Multiple photos of them together at fancy restaurants, vacation spots, family gatherings. They looked like the perfect couple, always dressed impeccably, always at some exotic location or high-end event. And then I saw it, a tag to another account, Sarah Anderson Official. My hands shaking, I clicked the link. It opened to a completely different Instagram profile, full of life and color, and my parents. There they were, standing on either side of Sarah in a high-end bridal boutique, champagne glasses in hand. The caption read, "Wedding planning with Mom and Dad. So blessed to have such amazing parents helping make my dream wedding come true. Wedding planning, best parents ever." Photo after photo showed them together, Christmas celebrations, birthday parties, luxury vacations. All dated back to Sarah's first year of college. All hidden from me. They had celebrated every holiday together, shared every milestone, while I sat at home checking a fake Instagram account, believing my sister was too busy to call. One post particularly caught my eye. Sarah standing between our parents at what looked like an expensive restaurant, all 3 of them beaming at the camera. "So grateful for my wonderful parents who've given me everything I could ever want in life. Your success inspires me every day. Blessed child, family first." With trembling fingers, I dialed Sarah's number. The phone rang and rang, each tone feeling like an eternity. Finally, on what must have been the 10th ring, she picked up. "What is it, Claire?" "I'm kind of busy," she answered, irritation clear in her voice. "We need to meet, today." I tried to keep my voice steady. "I really can't. I've got appointments all day and—" "I know about the wedding, Sarah." The words came out sharper than I intended. "I know about Mom and Dad too. I saw your other Instagram account. I saw all the photos with Mom and Dad. The wedding planning, the vacations, everything." Another pause, shorter this time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, harder, colder. "Fine. You want the truth? I'm tired of living like you, Claire. Scraping by, shopping at thrift stores, counting every penny. That's your life, not mine." Her words felt like physical blows. "I lived like that so you could have an education. I sent you money every semester." She cut me off with a harsh laugh. "Oh, that money? Yeah, I spent it on Gucci bags and Christian Louboutin shoes. Mom and Dad were already paying for my tuition and apartment anyway." "What?" I felt like I couldn't breathe. "You mean all those years I worked overtime, skipped meals?" "I never asked you to do that," she snapped. "That was your choice. And honestly, Mom and Dad give me more in a month than you scraped together in a year. They abandoned us." I was practically shouting now. "They left us with Grandma and never looked back. How can you just forget that?" "People change, Claire. They made mistakes, sure, but they've more than made up for it. They're successful now, wealthy. They can give me the life I deserve." "So they just bought you? Is that it?" "Call it what you want," she said dismissively. They're paying for half my wedding, James's family is covering the rest. It's going to be amazing, 5-star hotel, celebrity wedding planner, 300 guests. My voice was barely a whisper now. Why didn't you invite me? There was a moment of silence before she answered, her voice dripping with disdain. Look at yourself, Claire. No college education, living in grandma's old house, wearing off-the-rack clothes. You'd stick out like a sore thumb. My friends are all from good families, educated people. I can't have you embarrassing me. Her voice turned cold and final. Do not come to my wedding, Claire. I mean it. Don't try to contact me, don't try to show up. You'll only embarrass yourself and me. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence, feeling my world crumble around me. After I hung up the phone, everything I'd been holding back came rushing out. I collapsed onto the kitchen floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Michael found me there, curled up against the cabinets, tears streaming down my face. I heard, he said quietly, sitting down beside me. I heard everything. He held me while I cried, my tears soaking into his shirt. When I finally calmed down enough to speak, he had a determined look in his eyes. I need to make a call, he said, pulling out his phone. Michael, don't, I started, but he was already dialing. James? Hey, it's Michael. Listen, I need to tell you something important about Sarah, and you need to hear it before the wedding. I watched as Michael paced our kitchen, telling James everything, about our parents abandoning us, about how I'd raised Sarah, about the secret Instagram account and the years of deception. He told him about the money I'd sacrificed for her education, only to learn she'd spent it on luxury items while our parents paid her tuition. I won't be attending the wedding, Michael concluded. And you needed to know why. 3 weeks later, I sat in front of my laptop, watching the wedding livestream. I told myself I was torturing myself unnecessarily, but I couldn't look away. The venue was spectacular, crystal chandeliers, flower arrangements that must have cost thousands, a string quartet playing softly in the background. I watched as our parents arrived, Mom in an expensive designer dress, Dad in a tailored tuxedo. They looked exactly like their social media photos, successful, polished, proud. Sarah appeared in her wedding dress, looking like a princess from a fairy tale. The ceremony began traditionally enough. But when it came time for the vows, James stepped forward and took the microphone. I'm sorry, he said, his voice echoing through the speakers, but I can't go through with this wedding. The crowd gasped. Sarah's face went pale. There's someone missing here today, James continued. Someone who should be standing right next to the bride. Claire, Sarah's sister, who raised her when their parents abandoned them both. You could have heard a pin drop in that ballroom. Claire sacrificed everything for Sarah, her education, her youth, her dreams. She worked multiple jobs to put Sarah through college, or so she thought. And how does Sarah repay that love and sacrifice? By hiding her sister's existence, being ashamed of her, and uninviting her from this wedding because she's not sophisticated enough. Sarah tried to grab the microphone. James, please. No, he cut her off. I've learned something important through all this. Money can buy beautiful weddings and designer clothes, but it can't buy character. And I won't marry someone who could treat their own sister, their own mother figure, with such callous ingratitude. With that, James walked down the aisle and out the door, leaving chaos in his wake. The livestream continued for a few more minutes, capturing the stunned faces of the guests, Sarah's mascara-streaked tears, and our parents' attempts to control the situation. 2 weeks later, through the local business news, I learned that my parents' company had gone bankrupt. Apparently, they'd been operating on massive debt for years, maintaining a facade of wealth while teetering on the edge of financial collapse. Now it had all come crashing down, taking with it their ability to maintain Sarah's luxury lifestyle. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon when they showed up at my door, all three of them, looking considerably less polished than in their social media photos. We need to talk about what's rightfully ours, Mom announced, pushing past me into the house before I could stop her. Her eyes swept across the living room, the same furniture Grandma had loved, the same photos on the walls, the same worn but well-maintained hardwood floors. "This should have been mine," she declared, turning to face me. "This is my mother's house." Sarah followed, her heels clicking on the floor, though I noticed they weren't Louboutins anymore. "And I'm her granddaughter. I have rights too. Grandma loved me, she wouldn't have wanted me to struggle." Michael stepped into the doorway from the kitchen, his presence solid and reassuring. I was grateful he was home for this. I almost laughed at the irony. Now they remembered Grandma's love? Now they cared about what she would have wanted? Struggle? I couldn't help but ask. Like when you spent my hard-earned money on designer bags while lying to my face about college expenses? That's not relevant right now, Dad cut in, speaking for the first time. He looked tired, older somehow. "We're here about the inheritance. Your mother is right, this house should be partially hers." "And Sarah?" "Let me stop you right there," I interrupted, walking to Grandma's old secretary desk. I pulled out a document I'd kept safe all these years, unfolded it, and laid it on the coffee table. "This is Grandma's will," I said quietly. "Properly witnessed and notarized. Let me read you the relevant part." I cleared my throat and began reading. "To my granddaughter Claire, I leave my entire estate, including my house at 1247 Maple Street and all my savings and investments. She has earned this not just by being my granddaughter, but by being the daughter I wish my own had been, and the sister who gave up everything for Sarah's welfare." The silence that followed was deafening. "But that's not fair," Sarah exploded. "You already have a husband who can take care of you. I have nothing now. No wedding, no money, no." "No sister?" I suggested. "Because that was your choice, Sarah. You chose designer clothes over family. You chose to be ashamed of me rather than grateful. You chose money over love." I walked to the front door and held it open. "Now, I'm choosing too. I choose to let go of people who only remember family when they need something. Please leave my house." I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, feeling Michael's arms wrap around me. "You okay?" he asked softly. "You know what? I am," I replied, and I meant it. For the first time in my life, I don't have to take care of anyone but myself. I don't have to worry about ungrateful family members or try to earn love that should have been unconditional. As I walked into the kitchen to make coffee, I glanced at the family photos one last time. Some family trees need pruning to grow stronger, and I was finally ready to let go of the dead branches and focus on new growth. I'm Tessa Anderson, and from my earliest memories, I knew I was different from everyone else in our prestigious antique business dynasty. My parents, Robert and Eleanor Anderson, ran a network of antique shops and restoration workshops that had been in our family for generations, passed down from my great-great-grandfather. Our house was like a museum, filled with paintings, antique furniture, and what my parents called priceless artifacts. My older sister, Claire, fit perfectly into this world. 6 years my senior, she was everything my parents wanted in a daughter: artistic, cultured, and completely devoted to the family business. By age 12, she could already tell a genuine Renaissance painting from a replica, while I struggled to see any difference at all. My mind worked differently. Give me a math problem, and I'd solve it in seconds. Show me a physics equation, and it made perfect sense. But art? It might as well have been written in hieroglyphics. "Dad," I tried explaining one evening when I was 14, "I really think I'd be better suited for something else. Maybe business or engineering." He looked at me like I'd suggested becoming a circus performer. "Tess Sandra," he used my full name, which always meant trouble. "This business has been in our family for generations. Your sister understands the importance of tradition. Why do you insist on being so different?" Claire, who was passing by with her sketchbook, couldn't resist adding her 2 cents. "Maybe you're adopted, Tess. I mean, you clearly don't have the Anderson artistic gene." "Claire," Mom scolded, but I could see the slight smile she tried to hide. That hurt more than Claire's actual words. As the years went by, the pressure to conform only grew stronger. Every family dinner turned into a lecture about the importance of art and culture. Every school break meant mandatory internships at our shops, where I felt completely out of place among the antiques and art enthusiasts. I started finding ways to rebel. Small things at first, forgetting my art history assignments, skipping family gallery visits, spending more time in the math lab at school. But my parents' constant disappointment and Claire's perfect daughter act pushed me further. I remember the day I first lit up a cigarette behind the school gym. The act itself wasn't particularly satisfying, but knowing how much it would horrify my health-conscious, image-obsessed family gave me a twisted sense of pleasure. Looking back now, I can see how lost I was. The more they pushed me to be something I wasn't, the more I pushed back. It became a vicious cycle. They'd pressure me about the family business, I'd act out, they'd tighten their control, and I'd find new ways to rebel. I became an expert at forging Dad's signature on school notes. It started when they were called in for another discussion about my behavior. I perfectly mimicked his distinctive handwriting, explaining why he couldn't attend. The irony wasn't lost on me. My one artistic talent was forgery, something that would have horrified my antique-dealing parents if they'd known. My 18th birthday felt less like a celebration of adulthood and more like a countdown to my personal prison sentence. "We've enrolled you in the Art Institute," Dad announced over dinner, sliding the acceptance letter across the table like it was some kind of gift. "You'll study art history and conservation. It's time you got serious about your future in the business." I stared at the letter, my hands shaking. "I already told you, I want to study business analytics at State University." "I got accepted there too." Mom's face hardened. "That's out of the question, Tessandra. We won't pay for you to waste your time on numbers." She said it like it was a dirty word. "Your sister's already managing one of our shops," Dad added proudly. "In a few years, you could be doing the same." I stood up so suddenly, my chair fell backward. "I don't want to be like Claire. I don't want anything to do with antiques or art or this whole suffocating business." That night, I packed a bag and walked out. I expected them to come after me, to try to stop me, to at least call. They didn't. Their silence spoke volumes. I was finally free, but I was also completely alone. My friend Sarah let me crash on her couch for a few weeks, then I moved in with Jenny from high school. I picked up whatever jobs I could find, waitressing, retail, data entry. Nothing lasted long, but it was enough to survive. Then I met Mike. He seemed different from the trust fund kids I'd grown up around. He had a regular job in sales, his own apartment, and didn't care about my family drama. When he offered to let me move in after 2 months of dating, I jumped at the chance. 6 months later, I was staring at a positive pregnancy test in his tiny bathroom. My hands were trembling just like they had that night with the Art Institute letter, but for entirely different reasons. "Get rid of it," Mike said flatly when I told him. No discussion, no options. Just 2 cold words. "I want to keep it," I replied, my voice stronger than I felt. "Then you can't stay here." He started packing my things, before I could even process what was happening. I'm not ready to be a father, and I'm definitely not supporting someone else's kid. Suddenly homeless and pregnant, I swallowed my pride and went to my parents' house. Maybe seeing their daughter in genuine need would soften their hearts. "Please," I begged, standing in their immaculate living room while they sat rigidly on their antique sofa. "I just need help with real estate agent courses. I can make a good living, support myself and the baby." "A baby?" Mom interrupted, her face pale. "You're pregnant? Who's the father?" Dad demanded. "Mike, he's..." "That sales clerk you were living with?" Mom looked like she might faint. "Absolutely not. We will not have our family name tarnished by an illegitimate child from some nobody. You're not welcome in this house." Dad's voice was ice cold. "Not with that situation. We have a reputation to maintain. What would our clients think?" After my parents' rejection, I found myself sitting on a park bench, one hand on my still flat stomach, wondering what to do next. That's when I remembered, Claire had always been Dad's favorite, but maybe, just maybe, sister to sister, she'd help me. I called her from a payphone near the park. To my surprise, she agreed to meet me at a small cafe downtown. "Claire, I know we've never been close, but I need help," I said, fighting back tears. "I just need enough for the real estate courses, and maybe first month's rent somewhere. I'll pay you back, I swear." She stirred her cappuccino thoughtfully. "Actually, I might be able to help. But Tess, you'll need to help me too." "Anything," I said, relief flooding through me. The next day, Claire met me at her office after hours. She handed me an envelope stuffed with cash, more than I'd expected, and then pulled out a folder. "Just some paperwork," she said casually. "Shipping authorizations, transfer documents, you know how Dad is with his paperwork. He's been so busy lately, and I'm trying to help manage things." "You want me to?" I looked at the blank sheets mixed in with the documents. "Just sign them like Dad would." "Come on, Tess, we both know you're better at his signature than he is." She laughed. "Consider it your last art project for the family." I should have known it was too good to be true. Should have asked more questions. Should have read every document carefully. But when you're pregnant, broke, and your perfect sister finally seems to be on your side, you don't look too closely at the gift horse's teeth. I signed everything she put in front of me. Document after document, blank page after blank page, Dad's signature flowing from my pen in perfect imitation. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Dad, and he was livid. "Get to the house, now." His voice was trembling with rage. Walking into that house felt like entering a lion's den. Dad was pacing the living room, his face purple with anger. Mom sat rigid in her chair, while Claire stood by the fireplace, her face was a perfect mask of innocence. "You ungrateful little thief," Dad exploded the moment I walked in. "Wasn't it enough to embarrass us with your condition? Now you're stealing from your own family?" "What? I haven't stolen anything," I protested. He thrust some papers in my face, shipping manifests and sales receipts for several valuable paintings from their collection, all bearing his signature. My signature. These paintings were shipped out 2 days ago. Sold to private collectors. He was shaking with rage. "I never signed these papers." "But someone did." I felt the blood drain from my face as I looked at the documents. They were the same ones Claire had me sign, but now filled out with details of artwork sales I knew nothing about. "Dad, wait. You don't understand," I pleaded, my voice shaking. "Claire asked me to sign those papers. She said they were just routine documents." The moment the words left my mouth, Claire's mask of innocence transformed into a look of shocked hurt. She was always the better actor between us. "How dare you?" she gasped. "Daddy, I saw her here 2 days ago, sneaking around the house when everyone was at the gallery opening. I thought she was here to apologize to you and Mom, so I didn't say anything, but now." "That's a lie," I screamed. "I haven't been here in days. Claire gave me those papers to sign, she set me up." Dad's face hardened even further. "Enough. First you shame this family with your pregnancy, and now you try to blame your sister for your crimes? Claire has dedicated her life to this business. She would never." "But I'm telling the truth." I was crying now, my hands protectively covering my stomach. "Please, Dad, just listen." "I've heard enough," he cut me off, his voice ice cold. "You are no longer my daughter. I'm removing you from my will, and I want you to stay away from this family. You're dead to us." Mom just sat there, silent tears running down her face, while Claire played the role of devastated sister perfectly. Within hours, the phone call started. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all calling to express their disgust with my behavior. Claire had apparently been busy, spreading the story of my theft through the family grapevine. "I can't believe you would do this to your own parents," Aunt Margaret's voicemail said. Don't even think about coming to Sunday dinner anymore. We always knew that girl would turn out bad, I overheard Uncle James telling my cousin. Stay away from her, she's nothing but a thief and a liar. The stress was overwhelming. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time my phone rang, it was another relative calling to disown me. Each message was another nail in the coffin of my former life. 3 days after the confrontation, the cramping started. Sharp, terrible pains that had me doubled over. Then the blood came. I called an ambulance from my cheap motel room, but I already knew. By the time I reached the hospital, I had lost everything, my family, my reputation, and now my baby. The doctor said it was likely caused by extreme stress and anxiety. After being released from the hospital, I spent weeks barely existing. But one morning, I woke up and saw Claire's face smirking at me in my dreams, and something inside me snapped. They wanted me to fail? Fine. I'd show them just how wrong they were about me. I found New Beginnings, a women's support organization, through a flyer at a local coffee shop. Walking into their office was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Admitting I needed help went against everything my proud family had taught me. But Sandra, my caseworker, didn't see a failure or a disappointment when she looked at me. She saw potential. "You're good with numbers, you say," she asked during our first meeting. "And you understand property values? Have you considered real estate?" That conversation changed everything. The organization helped me enroll in real estate courses, provided a small stipend for basic needs, and even helped me find temporary housing in their women's shelter. All those years of analyzing property values in my head while my parents dragged me through antique shops had given me an instinct for market value. My mathematical mind could calculate mortgage payments and investment returns in seconds. And maybe, growing up watching people haggle over precious artifacts had taught me something about negotiation after all. I got my license in record time and landed a job at Metropolitan Real Estate. My first sale was a small condo, but the commission felt better than any praise my parents had ever given me. The clients, a young couple buying their first home, hugged me after the closing. "We didn't think we could afford anything in this neighborhood," they told me. "But you made it happen." More deals followed. I had a knack for matching people with properties, for seeing potential where others saw problems. Within 6 months, I was the agency's top performer. The money started flowing in, enough to rent a nice apartment in a secure building, buy professional clothes, and start building my own savings account. I quit smoking, joined a gym, and cut ties with the party crowd I'd hung around with during my rebellion years. My life was finally my own, and I was making it count. That's how I met James. He came in looking for commercial property for his tech startup. The moment he walked into my office, I knew this client was different. He didn't care about my family connections or social status. He was impressed by my knowledge of commercial real estate trends and my ability to crunch numbers on the fly. "You know," he said after our third property viewing, "we could discuss the rest of these listings over dinner." Our first date turned into weekly dates. He introduced me to his family, warm, unpretentious people who cared more about character than pedigree. His mother hugged me the first time we met, and his father actually listened when I talked about market analysis and investment strategies. A year later, James proposed. We had a small ceremony in his parents' backyard. No fancy church, no society photographers, no elaborate reception. Just us, his family, and a few close friends I'd made along the way. His mother helped me pick out a simple white dress, and his sisters decorated the garden with fairy lights. For the first time since losing my baby, I felt like I belonged somewhere. James wasn't just supportive of my career, he was my biggest champion. When I mentioned wanting to start my own agency, he didn't hesitate. "You've got the talent and the client base," he said, looking over my business plan. "Let me help with the startup costs. Consider it an investment in our future." Tessa Anderson Real Estate opened its doors 6 months after our wedding. But even as I was cutting the ribbon at our grand opening, I knew something was missing. "I want to get my business degree," I told James over dinner that night. I'm doing well on instinct and experience, but I need the formal education to take this to the next level. He smiled. I was wondering when you'd decide to do that. You know, Mom and Dad had an argument about how long it would be before you talked about college. That was another blessing in my life, my in-laws. Sunday dinners at their house became a tradition. James's mom taught me her secret recipes, his dad offered business advice, and his siblings treated me like I'd always been part of the family. No one judged me for not knowing about art or antiques. No one compared me to anyone else. I managed to balance running the agency, attending classes, and family time. My grades were excellent. Turns out when you're studying something you actually love, learning comes naturally. The business concepts I'd always understood intuitively finally had names and frameworks. Then one morning, as I was getting ready for class, a familiar name on the morning news caught my attention: major scandal in art world, prestigious antique dealer accused of selling forgeries. The headline screamed about Asian-made copies being sold as originals through a respected family business. I sat in my office, staring at the news on my computer screen in disbelief. My father, who'd disowned me for allegedly damaging the family reputation, was now at the center of the biggest art fraud scandal in years. My phone rang. Unknown number. Tessa? My mother's voice was barely recognizable. Please don't hang up. What do you want? My voice was steady, surprisingly calm. It was Claire, she sobbed. All these years, she's been running a forgery operation through our shops. Those paintings you were accused of stealing? They were fake she needed to get rid of. The real ones had been sold months before. She's been doing this for years. The auction house's authentication process exposed everything. I leaned back in my chair, letting the irony wash over me. We're facing multiple lawsuits, she continued. Millions in damages. Our reputation, everything we built. Tessa, we need your help. We know you're successful now, and James's family has resources. Please, we need money for lawyers. You want my help? I said into the phone, my voice ice cold. Fine. Here's my price. I want a public apology. Not just from you and Dad, from everyone. Every single relative who called me a thief, who spread rumors about me, who turned their backs when I needed them most. And I want Claire to confess what she did to me. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I'll see what I can do, my mother finally whispered. A week later, a video appeared in my email. It was filmed during our annual family Thanksgiving gathering, an event I hadn't attended in years. The familiar dining room was packed with relatives, and there, standing at the head of the table, was Claire. I need to confess something, my sister's voice trembled. Years ago, when Tessa was accused of stealing those paintings, it was me. I set her up. I made her sign documents when she came to me for help, then used them to cover up my own crimes. Tessa was innocent. The video continued as, one by one, my relatives stood up to apologize. Aunt Margaret, tears streaming down her face, admitted she should have known better than to believe the worst about me. Uncle James expressed his shame at how quickly he'd condemned me. Cousins I'd grown up with acknowledged their role in ostracizing me. My father spoke last, looking older than I remembered. We failed you, Tessa. We chose to believe the worst about you because it was easier than admitting we might be wrong about who you were. We pushed you away when you needed us most, and because of our actions, you lost. His voice broke, you lost your child. Your mother and I will carry that guilt forever. I sat in my home office, watching the video 3 times before opening my social media account. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I began typing. To my extended family, thank you for your apologies. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, and I appreciate that you finally found that courage. I accept your apologies and am grateful for the truth finally coming to light. I hit post, took a deep breath, and started typing again. However, to my immediate family, while I acknowledge your apologies, I cannot and will not help you with your current legal troubles. Years ago, when I came to you pregnant, alone, and desperate, you chose your reputation over your daughter. Your actions and rejection led to the loss of my unborn child, a pain I live with every day. The only assistance I will offer is the contact information for a competent lawyer. What you do with that information is up to you." I attached the lawyer's business card to the post and hit send. Then, methodically, I began blocking numbers, my parents, Claire, their business lines. I blocked their social media accounts, their email addresses, every possible way they had to reach me. The trial of Claire Anderson became one of the biggest art fraud cases in recent history. I didn't attend any of the proceedings, but I followed the news coverage from the comfort of my office. Each revelation was more shocking than the last. The scheme had been running for nearly a decade, with hundreds of forged paintings sold to unsuspecting collectors worldwide. My sister, the perfect daughter, the artistic prodigy, was sentenced to 15 years in prison. The evidence was overwhelming: offshore accounts, correspondence with forgers in Asia, detailed records of every fake she'd passed off as authentic. The prosecutors called it one of the most sophisticated art fraud operations they'd ever seen. The civil suits that followed were devastating. My parents had to sell everything: the shops, the workshops, their house, even Mom's precious jewelry collection. The Anderson family name, once synonymous with artistic excellence and integrity, became a cautionary tale in the antique world. Last I heard, they'd moved into a small apartment and still owed millions to angry collectors. I was 8 months pregnant now, and this time everything was different. No stress, no fear, no desperate pleas for help. Instead, I had a loving husband who attended every doctor's appointment, in-laws who were already arguing over who would host the baby shower, and a successful business that practically ran itself thanks to the amazing team I'd built. My real estate agency had expanded to 3 locations, and we were known as one of the most reliable firms in the city. Every time I walked into one of my offices, seeing my name, Tessa Anderson, on the door, filled me with pride. I'd built this on my own terms, using the skills my parents had dismissed as worthless. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd pushed me so hard to join their business, claiming it was the only path to success. Now their precious empire was in ruins, while I was thriving in the field they'd sneered at. My final semester of college was interesting, to say the least. Waddling into classes with my enormous belly, laptop balanced precariously on what was left of my lap. But I was determined to finish before the baby came. My professors were amazingly supportive, and my grades hadn't slipped despite the pregnancy. Looking back now, I don't regret refusing to help them. Some might call it cruel, but I call it justice. They'd chosen their golden child over me, and that choice had cost them everything. Meanwhile, I'd built my own success story, created my own family, found my own happiness. The baby kicks, and I smile, thinking about the future. My child will grow up in a home filled with love and acceptance, surrounded by people who value them for who they are, not who they're expected to be. They'll never know the pain of being the family disappointment, never feel the pressure to be someone they're not. Tomorrow, I'll graduate with my business degree. James and his family will be there, cheering embarrassingly loud when I waddle across the stage. My massive belly might make it a bit awkward to get my diploma, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Sometimes I think about that scared, pregnant girl who left home with nothing but a broken heart and a forged signature. She couldn't have imagined this future: successful businesswoman, beloved wife, soon-to-be mother, college graduate. But she knew one thing: she was stronger than they thought. And she was right.